You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
Hey everyone, welcome to another program of the MSP Zone. Today we're talking about patching. No, not patching a quilt. We're talking about good old-fashioned IT patching. And today's going to be part best practices for those of you who may be new to the managed services profession. You're maybe just a few years, maybe a few months into it, and you're wanting to figure out what things you should be doing, what things are expected of you as a managed service provider. Well, patching is one of those things. And if you are a veteran, stay tuned, keep listening, because we're going to be talking about some of the more cutting edge or why patching is still important today, just as it was 20 years ago when some of you may have been out there practicing managed services as a younger MSP. And here we have another special guest to break things down for us and to make the complex easy or easier to understand. We're joined by Shane Cooper from Webroot, an OpenText company. Shane, welcome to the MSP Zone.
Thanks, Charles. I appreciate the time. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah. So am I. So I know this could take us into any number of areas, but I want to start off with an easy one. Well, two easy questions. First of all, why don't you just explain a little bit about what you guys at Webroot are up to these days, and just an overview for those people out there in the audience who may not be familiar with Webroot.
Sure, perfect. No worries. Yeah, so Webroot is, it's a security agent. It's a platform. And when I say security agent, I try to stay away from terms like antivirus and malware. The reality is those are older terms. And while, we stop and block a lot of those things that still creep on machines, the reality is the bad guys have moved on to a lot of traditional methodology. So Webroot has what we call, a more modern, focus on how we look at endpoints and how we ensure that bad guys don't get on them. There's another term that kind of gets floated around. I kind of shy away from it as well, but unfortunately it's out there. It's called next gen. And I like to say Webroot's been next gen way before next gen was even cool. We started our current technology direction well over 15 years ago. So, we've been doing things like looking at 0-day stuff, looking at new binaries get built, looking at behavior analytics versus heuristics. While we still have traditional ways to determine, if something on a machine is bad or nefarious or attempting to do something bad, we certainly have a lot more modern, more current techniques to see how the bad guys and stop the bad guys. So the reality is what we think of at Webroot is we're here to stop the bad guys from getting on machines. We are an endpoint protection product. We're a full spectrum security product. We don't just look at AV or malware, antivirus and malware. We look at a whole host of things on a machine to ensure that, again, the bad guys haven't compromised it, haven't got on there and done, something either damaging or, trying to take advantage of the endpoint. So that's really, I guess, the heart and soul of what Webroot's all about. Obviously, we have a lot of technology wrapped around all that. That's certainly, to unpack that information, what I just said, certainly expands into lots of other areas. But, that's kind of the heart and soul of what Webroot's all about. Some of the newer things we're doing are we've just released some new shields. We call it Evasion Shield. It's really focused on what we call living off the land. The bad guys are coming back around to looking at scripting, looking at how I can take advantage of what is already on a machine, where I don't have to drop new technology or drop software on a machine. I want to take advantage of what's already existing and basically exploit the capabilities there. And then forthcoming is what we call foreign code shield. So we're always evolving, always adding new shields, we call them, new ways, because we're looking at, big data that we get from a lot of our existing customers. And we realize what the bad guys are trying to do. And we look at the new techniques, the new ways, and then we try to address them, fill those gaps, and focus on, ensuring a safe environment for our customers.
Well, I am no doubt the bad guys are keeping you guys very busy these days, and appreciate everything you guys do over there at Webroot. I'll start off with an easy question, Shane. So maybe not easy, but why do we patch? Why is patching still relevant today?
That is the core question that comes up all the time, and I get asked this all the time, and it's a great question. It's a perfect question, and it's both complex and easy. The easy answer is the bad guys take advantage of exploits, and exploits are literally just gaps in code, gaps in a particular system's operating system, maybe subcomponents that were overlooked, or some piece of information, or the way code is being handled on a machine. It might have looked really good from a performance perspective, and the original team that put it all together did the best they could. They were looking at performance or looking at some other metric to try and make the device work really well, and realized, or didn't realize, we left something open, we left it available, or the bad guys discovered some cool little trick to kind of sneak in there and act like a good piece of software, but in fact do bad things. And so the vendors all try to close those gaps. There's no such thing as 100% perfection in software. It's an impossibility. We try to achieve it. Webroot tries to achieve it, but unfortunately, just the complexity of coding, can leave vulnerabilities of what we call exploits. So the bad guys continually take advantage of those. The crypto lockers and the lockies and the Sodanokibis and all those more modern things have all been available because of exploit kits. And that's really what the bad guys do, is they build these exploit kits. They get them out on the dark web. They get them in however they exchange their information. And those exploit kits are what then the bad guys take advantage of. And then they look for devices where those exploits are present. And also drive-by situations. That's a biggie with websites and web servers and or just general internet servers, where if they can find some kind of exploit, put something in there where a user unknowingly stops by a website, everything looks fine, they got the information they wanted, but underneath the hood, some kind of drive-by piece came in through the browser, landed on the machine, and started trying to do things. And these things happen because of unpatched systems or software that has a leak or a hole or whatever terminology you want to use. And then ultimately, those things then end up with what we call zero-day threats. Those are the things that no one's ever seen before, or it gets built specific to that device or that machine through some hashing mechanism or some complex methodology in the coding that is unique to that device, and no security vendor has ever seen it before. We have no history to refer to. There's no hash note about it. And so we have to look at the behavior and what it's trying to do from that aspect and or other aspects. So anytime we can stop those before forcing the poor security agent to have to review it or take a look at it, the better off we are. And patching is probably the key to minimize or to almost eliminate those kind of situations.
So it's not, as I'm listening to you, it's not, we patch not just because there's a new feature, right? There's a new element that the software vendor has written and is now deploying. Your approach seems like it could be that, but it's also there are just exploits and always swarms of enemies trying to circumvent what is out there already. So it's almost two different rationales for patching, if I'm understanding you right.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Those are, the good reason we want to patch is for what you just said: features and new functionality, performance gains, all the good things. Those are the good reasons to patch. And unfortunately, we then have to look at the flip side of that coin and say, well, what is the bad reasons? And unfortunately, those of us who fight the bad guys every day have to think about the bad stuff so we can, keep you safe and protected. And that is these, hey, they, left something open. There's a whole concept of what's called atom tables that are underneath the hood of a Microsoft operating system. And these are things that most normal users, just you, me, and the regular daily driver driving their Windows device or Mac device or whatever their favorite operating system is, we're not necessarily always privy to that. So we just see the pretty pictures. We click on the things and it does the cool stuff we want it to do, and we're all happy. But under the hood, sometimes those things are doing really fast, cool things, but unfortunately, some kind of opening is exposed, and the bad guys try to take advantage of it. And we've heard about it in the news where there's things that sneak in, and that's where these things come from is some kind of hole or some kind of gap in the code. And so we unfortunately have to take the good with the bad.
Yeah. So I know I've read this someplace. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to confirm this, but I seem to recall one of the security, maybe it was the FBI, the InfraGard, but someone came out and said something, and it was never refuted. I assumed it's true. I shouldn't. I believe it to be true just based on logic and common sense. But a disproportionate, a high majority of the percentages of successful attacks, so breaches, occur in a non-patched or a known vulnerability. Right? There's a patch available for it, but the thing was not the system, the application was not patched. It seems so easy, if that's true, that why aren't we patching? What are we doing wrong in patching, Shane?
Yeah, I can't think of the exact report or reference that you're talking about, but I have seen them on and off over the years. And to be frank, you're correct. I mean, that is generally the vulnerability. I mean, it's pretty unlikely that a bad guy is going to just magically put something on that's not taking advantage of something that is not broken.
Right.
If everything is, perfect world and everything's all totally up to speed and there are no gaps in any of the code, then the bad guys would have no way to really, get in. Now, that said, humans are still somewhat of the last bastion to be patched. I mean, but unfortunately, we're not going away. So we have to then address it through knowledge and education, which is a whole nother conversation. But to your point, that is correct. Even if a human being clicked on something in an email, probably 9 times out of 10, that vulnerability or that piece of software that is trying to do something nefarious is in fact probably taking advantage of an exploit or a piece of code, or hoping to take advantage of something on a machine that is unpatched or uncorrected or unfixed or not corrected or not addressed.
It was preventable, in other words.
Typically, yes. I would say 90 to 95% of all the things that we see in our data gathering was preventable, and in either human error or just lack of keeping things up to date.
So here's probably the $1 billion question. Why aren't we're obviously doing something, I don't want to say wrong, but I mean, is it the pace at which patches are getting out there, being authored, and then takes time to test and then deploy? Something's missing. I mean, because it's not like we're just saying, "Hey, go out into the world and take your chances."
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the challenge is the sheer volume and the time and effort to test ahead of time, because we can sit here cavalierly and say, hey, patch everything, keep everything up to date, just click that update button instantaneously. Maybe on your little home PC or your computer that the kids are using that isn't, some line of business situation, that's fine. But you get into more complex, where variables, many, many, many variables all play together. You update one thing and it breaks something else. You have to be very cognizant of that. And what that really gets around to is what you and I have talked to in the past is really about change management. It's really changing. I mean, patching and updating is part of the change process. It's not just, hey, let me put this cool new thing on and let everybody know we're installing this new piece of software. It's also, hey, we're also updating the software. And and a lot of the software that we're talking about is the underlying architecture of the operating system, the scripting language. JavaScript is a very big one. Some companies use a lot of Silverlight. Browser technology is always, being used, and a lot of technologies moving towards browser-based applications. And, those things are constantly having to be updated. But if a customer is dependent on that to perform their daily function, and you or I or whoever is responsible updates the browser and it breaks their daily need, then we've got a problem. So, and that's probably what causes some to delay and or not patch at all. Some just like, I'll just do it quarterly or monthly. I'm not going to do it on a regular cadence. And unfortunately, I think that's really, kind of a bad approach. And so I think we really should be, you as MSPs and those of us who are in the technology world should be looking at a good, solid patch program. And as customers come on board with new software, that should be one of the top of mind things to introduce is, okay, how often, what's the cadence of this software vendor's patching? Are they coming out on a quarterly basis, daily basis, weekly? What is their cadence? So you can then get that into your patch cycle so you can then control it. So you're not just willy-nilly, oh my gosh, knee-jerk reaction is this thing's got a big problem. We better patch and break. And so that's the challenge. I mean, that is the balancing act that the MSPs have to, kind of control every day.
Yeah. I know if this was the live show, we'd probably have MSPs by the thousands calling in irate saying, wait a minute, Charles and Shane, it's not as easy as you say it is. Yep. And I think you brought up some good points there, Shane. So it really is a balancing act between the knowledge that it needs to be patched, it needs to be fixed. We're at least talking about security, but also the knowledge that it could break things, right? I mean, it's not like it's just maybe it's like the vaccinations, right? For the COVID, right? It's not like it's just a take a shot and go on your way. It's a take a shot, don't have an adverse reaction that puts you into the hospital. It's more complex, I guess. Correct?
It is. And it kind of depends. I mean, we're kind of talking in generalities, but it does kind of depend on, what we're talking about. I would think that an operating system and patching that is a little bit more like what you were saying with a vaccine. That's kind of a nice metaphor there. That's a core underlying thing that we all have to rely on every day. Whereas your scripting and or your line of business applications, your custom software, those kind of things, probably don't have nearly as bit of a breakage concern. Whereas your underlying operating system, if you break that, then the whole thing doesn't work. So you kind of have to treat each one with a little bit different priority. I do believe that the operating system is probably the biggest area of concern and probably should be the highest priority. But unfortunately, it probably affects the most, further reaching, when it gets into all the different sub apps or the environment or the whole situation the customer's trying to deal with.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Shane, on patching by schedule versus kind of a more impromptu mode of patching? Is it an either or? Is it a both? What guidance would you give to MSPs today?
So really, it is a combination of both. And again, that's that happy balance. I think that MSPs should get on a standard cadence, and that cadence can be whatever they're comfortable with. Maybe that's a monthly cadence that they approach all their patch, control points. Maybe it's quarterly for, certain applications, and they might have to step back and be weekly or monthly based upon the type of application. So what it really speaks to is process and procedure and defining that within your organization. There's a lot of MSPs are becoming, really, I hate to say over-organized, but I think that's a good thing. I've been on several different groups where I'm talking to CEOs who are really or CIOs who are also trying to understand ramifications of security from a process perspective to a governance to documentation. And I think patching should be falling right in line with all that. Whereas you have your procedures down, you can confidently tell your customer, look, we've got this as part of our procedures, and this is what we do from a schedule perspective. Now, we also understand there's emergency and hot fixes and things of that nature. I see that as something different than patching per se. Patching is that scheduled, we know, Webroot, for an example, just as an example, we try to release our agent every quarter. We really don't do a whole lot we used to be a little bit more frequent on our releases, but now we pretty much release our our agent releases every quarter. Between those releases, we do minor hot fixes if something unusual cropped up. And usually those aren't so much, security concerns. Those are more, hey, we're affecting the network or we're impacting the Active Directory login structure. And I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just trying to talk about this is just the reality of the world. And so, we just like everybody else, we have to put out hot fixes. So I would say hot fixes and things of that nature are not necessarily your core patching. And then you have to have somebody that's really probably defined as your patch manager. Even if it's a part-time job, I think that the MSP should have a patch management team, a patch management process, and a good solid schedule, whatever cadence works for you, depending on, how many customers you have, how big your endpoint count is. I mean, all those things are going to come into play as to how frequently you can do it. There's a lot, and not to put it off on someone else, but a lot of the RMM tools have patch technology or patch capabilities. So definitely get your arms wrapped around those and support them. And they're gonna take you a long way.
It seems like it's part of this is you hit on something that I resonated with me, which is just having a process, having someone, at least someone in the organization, in your MSP practice, designated or responsible for implementing a patch process or delivery. By the way, we're talking internal to your MSP practice and to your customers, right? MSPs, you cannot do away with getting patched internally. You got to do it yourself.
Right. Yep. Got to drink your own champagne first and make sure your customers are safe
exactly.
after that.
So Shane, you talked about, I'm just listening to and thinking about the complexity of the number of objects that need to be patched or can be patched. It seems like we need to start with a good inventory, like a good onboarding process and a device management or object management regimen to understand what is on the network, what is being managed, what is interacting with data or with other sensitive areas of access, and then having that person or that program deploy the patches. I mean, that really is a monumental job.
It is, but fortunately, and again, I know we're kind of moving away from Webroot technology. I mean, that's fine. My background is when I was responsible for this at my respective previous companies. Believe it or not, I didn't start with Webroot as my beginning, in my career. So back in the day, I'm a former admin. I'm a former system administrator for both enterprise companies and MSPs. So I've lived the life of an MSP and the technician and the support team for that. So that said, the reality is we have to rely on the technologies that are out there and available to us. And I'll keep referring back to the RMM, the remote management and monitoring tools. They are designed to help minimize the overall complexity. I would, definitely, and I'm sure we're talking to those from a seasoned all the way to the newer, younger MSPs, they are all going to be adopting some kind of RMM technology. And those RMM technologies provide that information. They give that visibility. They crawl out all the devices. They pull the inventories of the endpoints, and especially on an onboarding situation where you got a new customer, that new customer comes in. That's the first thing you're going to do is inventory their 10, 15, 20, or 100 machines, depending on how sizable the customer is. Get an inventory, get a sense of what it looks like today. And then depending on the size and scope, then it's going to come back to the customer and recommend, we patch and update, these systems, in a timely fashion, or they discover, hey, everything's pretty much up to date. It's just a matter of us keeping it on the straight and the narrow. So, the reality is the tools that are out there are designed to help, solidify that. And speaking to that, the reality is actually Webroot does have something on the roadmap in the next couple of years that is going to be looking at specifically exploit options. So where we talk about patching, which is just like, okay, let me look at the latest Microsoft KB or the fall or spring creator updates or whatever that looks like from a Microsoft perspective. Sometimes you also miss the other components. And so we're actually going to be building a exploit, awareness, if you will. I don't really have the terminology what we're going to call it yet. I just happen to be in on some of the early conversations because we do want to be able to uncover that. We're not going to go magically fix it all. We're not going to become the patch manager, but the intent is to basically along with the tools that we're talking about to help augment that patch process, because you might get an inventory back and say, okay, there's 1,000 things I need to update. What you really need now is a comparison that says, okay, of those 1,000 things, which are the most, from a prioritization? I need to prioritize those.
What's vulnerable? Like what's bad?
Vulnerable.
Yeah.
So where we're kind of looking to do is provide that vulnerability list where like we say, well, here's 150 things that we recognize in that same environment that are, potentially exploitable. That would then be the top of your priority list of the 1,000, right? Let me go get those 150 done. And then we can kind of back into some of the others that are not as, problematic.
It'd certainly make the MSP's time smarter, right? They'd spend their time in a more intelligent way, patching priorities, items in a descending order. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway, Shane. In 2000, patching was relevant, and today patching is just as relevant. It may not be sexy, it may not be something that's looked at as high tech, but it's part of the fundamentals. Is patching ever going to go away? Are we ever going to get to a point where, like the Terminator, right? The system becomes self-aware and it can patch itself. Is that ever going to happen?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm going to take a hard line and say no. I think the reality is I had a senior boss or senior director at one point kind of tell me something once, and he was in overdevelopment. He goes, look, at the end of the day, human beings are still responsible for creating all the tools. We might use artificial intelligence or machine learning to help us augment that. Now, as soon as I say that, tomorrow, Skynet will take over. Skynet goes over. And changes all that. But I mean, Webroot takes advantage of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and I can tell you, they haven't taken over us. We still need humans, and unfortunately, we're fallible. Total sidebar here is that I'm building a brand new house, and this is actually the third house I've built. And 2 houses ago, I sat with the supervisor, and he says, "Look, don't forget, we don't build a perfect house. It's a beautiful house when we're done, but human beings still come in here with hammers and nails and build a house. We don't have magic robots, and we don't see that happening." So I think the same applies with software development. Human beings still sit down and write thousands of lines of code, click and connect the dots. And there's just no physical way to ever be 100% perfect and pure. It's a goal to achieve or try to achieve, but I just don't. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been involved in the software industry for so long. I just have never seen it. It's gotten a lot better, for sure, but I really think patching will be relevant yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Well, I say that it's probably good job security for MSPs out there to hear you say that, because if it's such, I want to say it's easy. I mean, it's not easy work, but it's doable work for the vast majority of MSPs. And if you do it right and you can scale it and you can make it easier for you to do, it has huge dividends in terms of security and just peace of mind of knowing that the customers and your MSP practice are safer. So I agree, Shane. I think you're right. It's going to continue to be just as important as it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely. I will tell you, I interact with hundreds of MSPs every month. I will tell you the most successful MSPs have controlled, managed, scheduled patching, and they have been in business for years. And they're growing their business, and they're going to be in business for years to come. They've been long-term partners and customers of mine. Some of them are my good friends. And I can tell you, this is probably one of their core fundamental success value propositions is patch management, software updates. And to your point, it's self-serving to some degree. If I, as an MSP, can ensure that the machines that I manage are on solid ground, good footings, good quality position, software, operating system, et cetera, then I can sleep at night knowing that, those devices that I'm managing are also then, in a good position for my customer, and everybody wins, everybody happy, and we keep the bad guys at bay. And that's a win-win for everyone.
Well said. Well, there you have it, folks. Shane Cooper from Webroot, an OpenText company, talking about patching. Go check them out. Webroot.com, correct, is your domain?
Yep. That's it.
I know a lot of MSP Alliance members use Webroot, have been using Webroot for many, many years. So if you are not familiar with them, go check them out. If you want to talk to Shane, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you about patching and all that. But start off 2021 right. Have a person dedicated to this or responsible for it. Develop a plan, implement it, stay true to it, and you'll do yourself and your customers a big favor. Shane, thank you very much for coming on to the MSP Zone.
No worries. Thanks, Charles. Appreciate you having me on.
This is Charles Weaver with MSP Zone. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you will get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.